So they like pushed me onto the set with my book in my hand in front of Tina Turner, who was standing there like the queen. And she looked at the book and she said, "I would never wear that." And I was like, ah. She's like, "Oh, Angela has a long torso and I have a very short one, so I never wore two pieces." So I was like, "Yes, ma'am."
This episode of My Hollywood Story was recorded live at Soho House, West Hollywood. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and let us know what you think. Hello and welcome to My Hollywood Story. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. My guest today is Ruth E. Carter, the two-time Oscar-winning costume designer of Marvel's Black Panther films. Her latest collaboration with director Ryan Coogler, Warner Brothers' Sinners, has earned more than $367 million worldwide. I was so excited to meet and speak to Ruth about her legendary career, which includes one of cinema's most electric partnerships, that with director Spike Lee, which began on 1989's Do the Right Thing and has endured through more than a dozen films. Listen in as Ruth shares incredible moments she's had with other iconic collaborators, including Steven Spielberg, Jerry Seinfeld, Robert Townsend, Oprah Winfrey, Tina Turner, and the star of Black Panther, the late Chadwick Boseman. Just a quick note before we begin. We experienced a brief technical irregularity early in the live recording of Ruth's episode, so you may notice a subtle shift in sound quality. Thankfully, the issue was resolved within 10 minutes and didn't affect the rest of the interview. Please welcome Ruth E. Carter.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
Hi.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
So nice to see you, and thanks for color coordinating with me. Just kidding. We actually did not
You phoned me. I felt the pressure.
I wish I had that much extra time to plan. It is such an honor to meet you. It's so interesting when I told people that you were going to be a guest on my podcast, there is quite a reaction. And one of the most common was, "Oh my God, she's such a legend." That was the word.
Wow.
How does it feel to hear that?
It feels old, but at the same time, I have to give myself credit for going on a long journey and having the privilege to meet some incredible directors and work with some incredible artists and actors and really having the opportunity to hone my craft, to make mistakes, to be in rooms and, meet some of the most incredible people like Betty Shabazz and Odetta and going into their closets and pulling clothes out and talking to them about their lives. So, yeah, that part feels amazing. But I don't know if it makes me iconic as much as it makes, I guess it's my career that's iconic.
Which we are going to dive into right now. So hold that thought, and we will talk about Sinners as well. Cannot wait to dive into Sinners. And I want to go back to the beginning of your story, which begins in Springfield, Massachusetts. Yes. You came from a big family, a single mother household. Tell me what life was like for you as a child.
My mother worked as her degree says parapsychologist, and even though that's kind of like the mystic definition, she wasn't a mystic. She was a psychologist for the city. And so she knew everyone, and especially those who were poor like us, but she knew their problems. And so as she drove my brother and I to school, because we would always miss the bus, and she would point out people and say, "Oh, there's Mr. So-and-so," we'd be very embarrassed. And she'd say, "Oh, no, he looks good. He has a clean shirt on. He looks good," And she'd roll up back when we were rolling our windows down. She's like, "Mr. Johnson, how are you today?" And we're like, "Oh, my God, she's talking to the homeless guy."
Now, was she a social worker in this capacity?
She worked for social workers and psychologists in their office. And, in the 60s, where I was born in the 60s, people of color didn't necessarily get the kind of attention that they always needed. And so my mother would take on divorcees, and those were her friends. So, that part of me growing up was like psychology books all over the house all the time. Anything that was wrong with me, I could find a book. I could find a chapter to read, like, this is why you're having imposter syndrome. And that part was, very much prevalent in our household. Also, my two brothers were artists. Our oldest brother, Robert, was the artist of the family. He painted with oils, and he did lots of commissions, and he actually had a show, an exhibition in our hometown in the mezzanine of the movie theater, and we were super proud of him.
And when did you feel or realize that you had artistic leanings?
I was always chopped liver to my brothers. My other brother, who was an artist, he did lots of pastel work and graphite, and I would just copy them. If they did a painting, I did the exact same painting. It was like nothing original. And then they would tell me what I did wrong. And, they were brothers. So I just always wanted to be like them. And that's how I never entered into anything thinking that I was already an artist. I was always trying to be one. Yeah.
You sort of felt like in their shadow a little bit.
Yeah, a lot.
And when was the first time you used a sewing machine?
I discovered the sewing machine in my room. It looked like a desk, an old wood desk, and that's where I was drawing. And I opened the drawer and I found like a little Singer sewing pattern in there. They had the 3 little drawers on the side. Then I picked up the leaflet, and inside was a sewing machine. So I pulled it out, and I actually swapped all that drawing for sewing. And I just wanted to learn how to do it. I was like, this is something I could learn, to make stuff on. And I started sewing. I didn't want to wear anything that I made because I was teaching myself. So, cutting threads and all of that stuff was not in my vocabulary
now, was this something
yet.
that your mother had done and her mother had done? It seems it's often
my
passed
mother was
down.
not that. She had 8 kids. There was no sewing. It was all work. It was something that she was given, and she gave it to me. And so, that's how I started sewing. I just kind of taught myself how to sew. It was like a hobby. Yeah.
And what age was this?
I was in junior high.
Okay.
So I don't know how old you're in junior
12
high.
or 13.
12.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in junior high school doing that, and just like dreaming up like an orange puffy furry vest, like let's try that. And actually, my mother didn't have much money, so she wasn't buying me fabric. I had to go into the attic where everything that you used to wear lived, and I kind of recycled, like upcycled, whatever it's called now. I was doing it then, and it wasn't called any of those things. So I made a patchwork blazer out of a whole bunch of old jeans. And I didn't want to wear it, like I said. But my next door neighbor, Tommy, fell in love with it. And he was a small guy, and he wore it all the time. So I felt like, that was my first costume.
And did you give it to him for free?
Yeah, I just let him have it.
That is so
I
great.
didn't want it.
And at some point in your teenage years, did you think, I want to do this as a living, I want to pursue this, or was it something that to you was still a hobby during this time?
Yeah, no, I was in some wonderful programs as a high school student. One was called Uhuru Sasa, and that meant Freedom Now, and it was at the University of Amherst in Amherst, Mass. And they took kids out of school that were in these, cities, urban communities, and they housed them for like 3 weeks in dorms. And the students were the mentors. So they gave us like remedial classes, and also we learned Black prose, Black music. We drummed on the grass. We recited Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni. It was great, and so that kind of sparked an interest in performing. So I went to, getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to perform. I felt, the spoken word thing was big in the SASA program. And so I kind of thought about that as a career. But I came from also a legacy of teachers. So at Hampton University, where I ended up going to college, I already had aunts and uncles that were there, cousins that were there. They were all in elementary education and education. So I went to Hampton specializing in special education because I wanted to do sign language. And I was that kid. Sign language and theater for the deaf and all of that.
And obviously Hampton is an HBCU.
Yeah.
What? Yes. Yeah, let's applaud.
Hampton.
How did it feel to be part of that community, and how did being part of that community change the way you saw your future?
Yeah, Virginia is a very historic place. And you can't be on a campus like Hampton's campus and see a statue of Booker T. Washington pointing towards the Emancipation Oak and not be inspired to know more about yourself. And my time in Virginia, knowing that I was this light-skinned girl with green eyes with the last name Carter, and there were several Carter's Grove plantations in Virginia, I found myself very curious about blacks, African Americans in Virginia. And as I began to study the history of Virginia and knowing that I would audition for plays, I was still a special education major for 2 years. I decided to change to theater arts, change my major. And I got a job at Colonial Williamsburg I was in that living history program where you walk around talking to the visitors as if they're living with you in 1830s. And I would take it to another level. I was barefoot every day. I wrapped my head every day because as I started to learn more about, the population of mulattoes in Virginia and the Carter's Grove plantations and how people could buy their freedom and buy their children back, it just intrigued me. And so I would talk to the visitors about that. They wanted me to talk about some happy story, but I wanted to talk about how I was buying my husband's freedom back. And
did your bosses have any notes on this?
Yeah, they tried to change my monologue a lot of times, and I would just keep referring back because it was very much, if someone asked you a question on the street, you answered it. And so I had two characters. One was Betty Wallace, and she was a free woman, and she was making dresses in a big basket and selling them to buy her husband's freedom. And the other character was every other day was Ginny. And Ginny was a tavern maid. And so I went there, like, what's happening to her? And so when they came out of the tours that they had in these taverns on the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and they went to the back where the garden was, they encountered me. And I was barefoot with a rag on my head, and I was ready for them, ready to tell them the truth about what was going on inside that tavern.
This should be a movie unto itself. This is
a really
great story.
But that's what really, I started to understand history. I was assigned historians. One was the late Reggie Butler, who was a historian on Virginians, enslaved Virginians, and also Linda Bolton Smith, who was also coaching us in performance. And it just started to well up in me.
What an incredible story. So after college, you would do a number of internships and also work in opera, which is amazing, in Santa Fe. And now I want to talk about the most meaningful collaboration, or at least among the most, with Spike Lee, whom you met in 1987. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And you have made 14 films with him. Is that right?
Somewhere around there.
Okay. I always like to make sure I have my data correct.
I can't keep up.
Of course. So tell me about, I know you met him in LA. Tell me about A Night for Dancing.
Oh, yeah. So Otis Salid, who's a choreographer in California, I was working downtown at LATC, if you heard of it, Los Angeles Theater Center. I looked at the calendar section of the LA Times, and I saw that the LATC was opening up a big theater that had 5 theaters under one roof, experimental, proscenium, thrust stage. They had all these stages, and they had a picture of their employees standing on this spiral staircase in the lobby. And I had just moved to Los Angeles, was living with relatives, and I was like, they need me. I went down there, I got a job, and I was hired as the shop foreman, which I don't know why I qualified for that, but I took it. And Otis came down to LATC with his dance company with the performance of A Night for Dancing. And it had started in a little small dance studio in South Central. It was very popular. And so they brought it to this bigger venue downtown to perform. And I went to the performance in the evening, and I saw that they needed costumes. They really needed a professional costume designer. And I was interested in being a costume designer. So I approached Otis, and he took me on, and I used LATC's stock to create costumes for them because they had no money. And back to the little dance studio it went, and it took off. And that's where I met Spike, who came to see a performance.
Incredible. History was made in that moment. So I'd like to talk about School Days. Came out in 1988. Spike's second feature after She's Gotta Have It. Set at an HBCU called Mission College. And for those who haven't seen it, it's fantastic. I rewatched it recently, and it centers on an activist-minded student named Dap, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and Julian, played by Giancarlo Esposito, who's the head of the biggest fraternity on campus. And of course, Spike plays Half Pint, who is rushing the fraternity. So Spike called you in '87 to see if you would work on this film, and he had also attended an HBCU, so this was a familiar environment. Morehouse, of course. So in rewatching this film, I'm struck by it's an audacious creation. It's a musical. It's hilarious. It's timely. It has very intense messaging. When you sat down with him for that first meeting to talk about his vision and your vision, where did they intersect?
Wow, you're going way back to a conversation I had over 30 years ago.
Yes.
But I can say that Spike is very intentional. So as we crafted the ideas for School Days, I was at 40 Acres and a Mule in Brooklyn in a loft space.
This is his company headquarters.
His company, his offices, and we first started out doing sweatshirts and T-shirts. Mission College, Uplift the Race, Divest Now. I did an image of Nelson Mandela on the front of a T-shirt. We also went into the Letterman jackets. Spike was very much into sports, so the jerseys and things like that were very much customized, and I spent a lot of time creating the paraphernalia that students wear on campus. And we had these fraternities and sororities, so I had to do lots of graphic design, actually, for the gammas, the gamma rays, the fellas, And because we came from that environment and that world, it was easy to imagine, what the pledgees might look like. And Spike was very much involved. He and I, he rode the train a lot. That's all he did. A lot. That's all he rode. The subway. And so we took the subway into Manhattan to buy the gear for the pledgees, which you saw they wore hockey shin guards and jackets and stuff. And we went to, I think it was called Starter Sportswear in Manhattan, and we were just buying up the whole store. And I ended up getting left there. Spike had to go to a Knicks game. And so I asked them to give me one of those big hockey bags. They look like body bags. They're huge. And we stuffed everything. The employees helped me stuff everything we bought into this hockey bag. And
did you have to get on the subway with that?
No, I got a cab, and it was at transition time in New York City, when cab drivers around 5 o'clock are going from one shift, a new shift comes. They don't want to pick up anybody. So they took me to Brooklyn, but I had to sit in the front seat of the cab because the body bag was in the back seat. It was crazy.
Did the driver ask, what's in this bag?
Yeah. No, because half the store was helping me shove it in the bag. They knew it was full of, gear. But, that's kind of where we were in independent film. You don't know that, you're supposed to have a driver and you're supposed to leave it there and have someone else come swing around and pick it up. And no, we were doing it like you bought it and you took it home.
Of course, you had to do it yourself. So I was struck looking at the timeline of this film and then also looking at the timeline of A Different World, which premiered the year after. You were right after. Mm-hmm. And 3 actors, at least, appeared in both Kadeem Hardison, Jasmine Guy, and Darryl Bell. Yeah. Was that just a coincidence that they were in both films? Okay.
Not at all. I mean, sort of like movies do inspire TV series, and I think that School Days was groundbreaking, and it proved to have an audience.
It was a great spinoff. Mm-hmm. So now we come to Do the Right Thing, Spike's masterful and Oscar-nominated screenplay about simmering racial tensions in a Brooklyn neighborhood between its African-American residents and the Italian-American owners of the local pizzeria. And you have said about making this film, quote, when we made the movie, we were seeing a future of Black people in storytelling, which was a forward-thinking idea at the time. What did you mean by that?
Well, we weren't really seeing representation as we thought it should be seen in cinema. So our storytelling, we were trying to be as authentic to the neighborhoods of Brooklyn. It was also very difficult to, find representation, and so...
and do you mean representation depicting Black stories, contemporary Black stories about how people were living at the time, as opposed to, say, a period piece? Like actually showing what contemporary Black culture looked like. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I felt like we were seeing a lot of gangbanger kind of, colors. Remember that? Colors was in the movies. It wasn't really like Brooklyn like we knew was a melting pot. Like you could see a woman in an African gala. It was like Wakanda, for us. And we really wanted to represent like what culture looked like in Brooklyn. And, it's also a protest film. So that was the storytelling, and that was, what Spike wanted to project. So what was hard was that we had a small budget, so we had to depend on like the sneaker companies to give us clothes, and so Nike gave us a bunch of, athletic wear.
And Spike was already doing his campaign with Nike at this point.
He was already doing a campaign, so they were on board, and so I got lots of T-shirts and compression shorts and colors and tennis shoes, and I had to figure out how I was going to balance out all the saturated team colors to bring it back to the neighborhood. So we used a lot of African fabrics, a lot of Ankara fabrics, and balanced everything. And what it kind of created on its own is a little bit more of a surrealistic view of Brooklyn. It was more of a cultural, coming together of color. You see that red brick wall that the cornermen stand in front of. And so all of the, ideas that we had of really showing a realistic depiction of Brooklyn morphed a little bit. It was a little more hyper-real. And it actually worked for the intensity of the riots. Once we get to nighttime and you see all that saturated color, it still feels very hot. It's supposed to be the hottest day of the year in the summer when tensions rise and people riot. So it worked for the intention of the film and the storytelling.
I spoke to John Turturro a couple months ago about his experience working with Spike, who's a dear friend of his. Mm-hmm. And he told me that Spike mandated that dailies be shared every night with crew and cast. Mm-hmm. And he said, and his character, of course, is very racist in the film. Yeah. And he said that he had to convince crew members that he wasn't really a racist because he was so convincing in that role. Yeah. And he talked about how the dailies really added to, not tensions on set, but really made the performances feel so alive because everyone was enjoying them in real time and watching them in real time. Yeah. How did that affect your work?
Well, it was definitely a masterclass because we would go to LIU, which was at Flatbush and Fulton.
This is Long Island University.
Yeah, Long Island University, where we had a screening room, and it was actually like a lecture hall. And we would watch what we shot the day before. So it allowed you to kind of examine things like, oh, I spelled Bed-Stuy wrong on Radio Raheem's
I was just going to ask about that T-shirt.
And we were able to correct it. But it actually was a masterclass in that we could see how colors mixed, how we could tone things. And
I was going to ask, did you make any adjustments to your work besides the Bed-Stuy spelling after watching the dailies? Did you think, oh, we really need to dial this back, we need to add more of this?
Yeah, we had that practice going on Mo Better Blues, Do the Right Thing, Crooklyn. We made all kinds of adjustments based on being able to see things early and on the big screen as well. Reflections, all kinds of things.
So brilliant. Thank you for making that movie, by the way. I think I've seen it 10 times, and every time I'm just struck by this. It's just such a masterpiece. And it has held up. Unfortunately, it's still very timely in its themes, but just a beautiful ode to Brooklyn. Yes. So how did your stock in Hollywood shift after that? Were you suddenly being hired? Were you suddenly on more folks' lists to bring in your vision for costuming?
No, I was in a really great spot, because black film was popular. And Robert Townsend was out here in California. He had just done Hollywood Shuffle. And so he was writing a script called BAPS and 5 Heartbeats. And then Keenan Ivory Wayans was here, and he wrote a script called I'mo Get You Sucker. And so after I worked with Spike in New York, I would come out to California and I would work with the Wayans, or I would work with Robert Townsend. And I had an opportunity to tell comedy and create goldfish shoes and do the pimp ball.
Right. And get silly.
I was a kid in a candy store because I loved costume design, and they gave me the opportunity to, be that. And when I'd go back to Brooklyn every year, Spike would be like, talk to the hand. I don't want to hear about that. It's a comedy.
Was he jealous of your collaborations with others?
Maybe. But, he didn't want to hear about Over Gold. And I was like, these guys died because they had on too many gold chains. So it was so cool to be able to go do Mo Better Blues and then come back to California and create BAPS.
That's incredible. And I have BAPS on my list to talk about in a moment. Okay. Because, of course, we have to. But I do want to talk about Malcolm X, because for me this was a very seminal movie for Spike, but also for you. First Oscar nomination, if I'm not mistaken. of course, starring Denzel Washington as the iconic activist.
Mm-hmm.
And you have said that you consider this movie your first large-scale production in terms of the scope that was required of you. And again, rewatching it, I'm thinking you had to, this is incredible, 1920s, 40s, 50s clothing, all in one film. How did you manage the scope of this process as we watched Malcolm's life unfold?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, so I came out of theater, and theater trains you in research and how to research different time periods. But Spike had 40 acres and a mule, and he had a garage that he had just bought. And if you know anything about New York, you know that garages, sometimes they receive cars in an elevator, and their elevator will take the car up to a different floor where you park inside of a building. And he had bought a parking garage that it's now where 40 acres and a mule is housed, but then it was just an abandoned garage with a huge like freight elevator. So one of the things that I did was I housed myself in that building. One of Spike's employees said, "Hey, Ruth, you know, Spike just bought this building. It might be a great place for you to put the costumes for Malcolm X." So it became like a department store. The first floor was the 20s on up to the top fourth floor, which we had the 50s and the 60s. So if you were in the film, whether you were background or, well, principals were all dressed on one floor, but if you came over to the building to get dressed, you were assigned a floor depending on what era you were in. And we housed all of the clothes that we gathered on those different floors, which made it really easy to distinguish. When you went to the third floor, you would see the 30s. And I had, you know, great costume assistants that were assigned to those eras. I knew how to organize, and my theater training showed me that. But it wasn't until Malcolm X did Hollywood take notice. It wasn't until the nomination did I start getting jobs outside of, you know, the black filmmakers that I frequently worked with.
Now, the scope of that movie, of course, required thousands of costumes. Were you hand making these with a team? How did you approach the creation aspect of this?
Well, you know, outsourcing. We had the zoot suits made by Taylor in New York City, but we also had a workroom that we assembled. I still do that today, you know, workrooms that create multiples and things. But for Malcolm X, it was gathering a lot of vintage clothes from California and around. And it's funny, like people contact you when they know that you're doing something like that for Malcolm X. I was contacted by a guy in Chicago who had a warehouse of coats from the 40s, and I went there and there were just piles of coats everywhere from the 1940s, and he was like, you know, pick what you want, $5 each. And I was like, oh my God, I've died and gone to heaven, wardrobe heaven. So that kind of, and when you see that Joe Louis scene in Malcolm X where he wins and everyone's outside, all of those are coats from that Chicago collector.
That is incredible. Now, I read that there is a bizarre crossover between Malcolm X and Seinfeld. Is this true?
Yeah, I let
Because
the
if it
cat
is,
out of
it's
the
my
bag.
favorite story I've ever heard. So if you could please share it.
Yeah, I was on someone's podcast just like last year, I think. And I knew this story. It's like things that live in you, and you go, yeah, that's how he got the... Every time I looked at Seinfeld and I saw George, I looked at his glasses because I did the pilot for Seinfeld, and it was right after Malcolm X. And the guy playing George...
Jason?
Yeah, Jason. He asked for glasses. And so I had these from... in my kit from Malcolm X, and I had him try on the wire rims, and he was like, yeah, something like this. I was like, cool, you got it.
And these are the glasses that Malcolm wears in prison, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
the very thin.
The very thin wire rims. So, you know, we had Jason fit for his own because he needed his prescription in them, but that's where the idea came from, from Malcolm X.
That is an intersection I don't think any of us could have ever imagined.
That's what happens when you're a costume designer and you come from the theater. You save things.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I love it. So I'd like to talk about a very different film now, What's Love Got to Do with It? The incredible story of Tina Turner. Came out in 1993, written by Kate Lanier, hope I'm saying that correctly, and directed by Brian Gibson. Of course, based on Tina's book, I, Tina, and starring Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne. So unlike Malcolm X, your subject here was very much alive, very much thriving. We miss Tina. May she rest in peace.
Yes.
What was your approach visually to honoring Tina's story, but also catering your work and your designs to Angela and her unique physicality in this role?
Yes, I had lots of research from Tina Turner's assistant, who gave me family photos, all kinds of research. And I knew the era of the 60s, and I just wanted to shepherd Angela into this role. If you were on set with Angela, you would see her sitting over to the side, gesturing and working on her craft as a performer. And I was working as hard to bring to merge the real Tina and Angela Bassett, who actually had different body types. Where Tina Turner had a really short torso and long legs, and Angela long torso and shorter legs. Just different body types. So it wasn't as important to me to make Angela into Tina in that way. I wanted to make Angela's performance feel like this rock star who came up from Nutbush and emerged as this iconic singer, until Tina Turner came to set. And that was like 2 weeks before we were done. We usually shoot like 12 weeks. And she didn't come around till like 2 weeks before we were done. And somebody popped onto the wardrobe trailer and was like, Ruth, Tina Turner is on set. I was like, oh my God, you're kidding. Like, I froze. And they're like, show her your book of continuity. And I was like, no. So they pushed me onto the set with my book in my hand in front of Tina Turner, who was standing there like the queen. And she looked at the book and she said, I would never wear that. And I was like, ah. She's like, oh, Angela has a long torso and I have a very short one, so I never wore two pieces. So I was like, yes, ma'am. And she said, ask, Angela if she'd like to wear this. And she showed me her CD cover, which she had one-piece leather dress for her song, What's Love Got to Do with It? And I went and made that dress. It was like we had to do it overnight. And the next day, I walked to Angela's trailer, and Tina was in there plaiting her hair. Angela's sitting on the floor in front of her, and she's like cornrowing her hair to put her wig on her. And I had the leather dress all made up, and I thought, wow, this woman is passing her crown. And, Angela, look what she has become. So it was one of those times that you'll never forget.
What an incredible moment. You must have left your body a little bit during that
I did.
time.
No camera phones, nothing like that. You just, lives in your heart and your mind.
So beautiful. So I do want to talk about BAPS now.
Yeah.
1997, director Robert Townsend's cult classic, and written by Troy Byer, who's actually a woman.
Troy, yeah.
Starring Halle Berry and the late Natalie Reid, who I believe passed away 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And for those who haven't seen it, it's about two wannabe so-called, quote, Black American princesses named Niecy and Mickey, who travel to LA to find a rich man who will pay for the world's first combination hair salon and soul food restaurant, which is something I think we do need in life.
Yeah, I would go there.
And co-starring of all people, the late Martin Landau, bless his heart. He really was a very silly gift in this movie. So in rewatching this film, I was struck by not only just the ingenuity of these designs. They are so over the top and so fun, But I want to talk about how you worked with hair and makeup on this project, because the hair, very large sculptural pieces, certainly informing production, movement, informing your design. So tell me about those collaborations specifically on BAPS.
Yes, BAPS was, the hair designer was Kim Kimball, who's famous now. She did Beyonce's tour now. I mean, she was doing back then like Hair Wars. And she was winning, and she, collaborated with a guy who, if he would put a propeller inside of a sculptural hair design, and she would enter it into a hair contest, and she would win. She was winning. So she was hired by Robert Townsend to be the hair designer for BAPS, and she put Bow Wow on the back of Natalie's hair, and it was like really fun. It was that one of those, like I said, I went back and forth between LA and New York for 14 years. The whole time I worked for Spike, I lived in California. So I'd come out here, and Robert Townsend would have written something like BAPS, and we'd all come together and really have a laugh. But also, Robert wrote everything out. Like, he had a Bible when you started, and he outlined everything, because Hollywood Shuffle was financed by his credit cards, and so he worked in low budget independent films, so he had to be very mindful of how the money was spent, and created a manual for all of us to follow, and then within that we would create these looks.
So how specific was his writing? Was it she's wearing an orange leather catsuit? Was it that
No,
specific?
wasn't written in there. It would be like, I'm wearing an Armani suit. Or that was for 5 Heartbeats. Was it 5 Heartbeats? Yeah. So BAPS, I don't remember specifically what his direction was, but I do know that the rubber suit was kind of born from a scene that he wrote where Hallie is trying to figure out how a bidet works. And Nisi, I guess it was her character's name, and the water spews everywhere. And as I read that scene, I was like, she needs to have on latex, and really, like, more than just the water. She can't control how her body is moving and slipping around based on all of the water that spews out of this bidet. So I feel like I had a stake in the joke.
And I have to say, this film feels like a watershed moment for Black women to have the opportunity to do such broad, silly comedy. I'm trying to think of a movie that is there even a comp for this movie? It feels very singular to me.
Yeah, and people revisit the movie. I around Halloween, I usually get someone tagging me on Instagram and showing me their BAPS costumes.
I saw there's some BAPS costumes for sale that you've made it when people are dressing up for Halloween. So I'd like to talk about Amistad now, your collaboration with Steven Spielberg, and you earned your second Oscar nomination. And this was in 1997. And for those who haven't seen the film or have forgotten what it's about, it centers on the 1839 revolt of Mende slaves aboard a Spanish-owned ship, which causes a major controversy in the U.S. The courts must decide whether the Mende are slaves or legally free. Directed by Steven Spielberg, of course. How would you describe the Steven Spielberg experience? What is the collaboration like? What is a tenet of the way he approaches your work and then collaborating with you?
He's an admirer of the filmmakers who make the films, and in such a way that I think is astounding and surprising. When I met with Steven at his offices, I was ushered into a conference room. He came in and sat across from me, and he said, I really loved your work in Malcolm X. And I don't know why I was surprised to hear Steven Spielberg say that, but it was nice to hear that he was an admirer of my work, and that really set the tone for the conversation that we had about Amistad. And there was no script to read. The script was written by Steve Salian, but it wasn't being distributed out to the people who were interviewing for the job. But I had Cliff Notes with me on the Amistad Revolt that I read. And so we had a conversation, and then he said, if you'd like to work with me, let me know. Here's the script, take it home, and let me know if you'd like to work together. And I thought I could just go to the parking lot and call him back. But I'll read the script first. And the collaboration continued in that manner, in that he admired what you were doing, what you were bringing to the table. I remember asking him how he wanted Anthony Hopkins to look in a scene where it's late at night and he's getting some transcripts ready, or he's working in his study. And he said, I'd like him to look adorable. And I loved that description that he used. So I prepared Anthony Hopkins' costume. He was dressed in it. I escorted him to set, and I stood back as he walked onto set to greet Steven Spielberg. And Steven reached out his arms and said, "You look adorable." And it felt really good. And I think that when a filmmaker respects what you do, it pulls the best out of you. It really makes you want to create and please them, because after all, this is Steven Spielberg. But also, I remember us having a remake of the Amistad ship in Long Island in the water, and we all had to work on a boat. And someone asked me to come to camera to show Steven what Cinque was going to look like on the journey back to Africa. And all I had with me, because we were kind of offshore, was a little postcard of the real Cinque, which had this baldric kind of crossbody drape of this white fabric. All I had was that little postcard of Cinque, the real Cinque. So I just went to set with that postcard, and he understood where it was going and the meaning behind it. So there's moments like that you share with great filmmakers that appreciate you, and you appreciate them, and your communication flows on so many different levels. You know, it can be very technical, it can be very intentional, and then it can be just very loose and broad, and that's two artists coming together with a common cause.
Incredible. So before we talk about your work with Ryan Coogler, I do want to mention that you got a star on the Walk of Fame.
I did.
In 2021, and yes,
Thank
congratulations.
you.
And you had two very renowned speakers on hand that day, Eddie Murphy, with whom you'd worked on Dolomite Is My Name, and Oprah Winfrey, with whom you'd worked on The Butler and Selma. And I was intrigued to read about a discussion that had taken place with Lee Daniels about Oprah's hair in a certain scene. And if you could just describe what that discussion was, but I really want to amplify and ask you about managing creative differences on set. When a director has an idea and an actor has an idea and you have an idea, they don't all necessarily align. What have you learned about solving those moments in a peaceful way, but also sticking to your guns?
Well, the myth is that these differences happen in the moment, and they really don't, because you need time to let those moments breathe. As a director, you have the right to say, I would like the character to go to the bus station in rollers, in curlers, and you can't just say, no, that's not going to happen, because this is their vision, and you have to trust that they have many more reasons than just what meets the eye, what's in front of you. There's many more reasons why a person who's directing a film is asking for things. So I always let it breathe and let it have moments inside of me, too, of revelation of what is the reason for it. And if it still doesn't make sense, than the actor sometimes says, let's have a conversation. You have to have time for these ideas to sort of morph and change. And it's not necessarily somebody winning over the other. It's people having a moment, artists having a moment. And so with the case of Oprah wearing curlers to the bus station, as she's David Oyelowo, who played her son, Forrest Whitaker, who played Earl Gaines, who worked at the White House, we felt when Oprah called me, she said, like, this character is a pillar in their community. They represent, the pride of being at the White House and having curlers on at the bus station is a little bit less than they would think of themselves in public. There is the black bourgeoisie. There is these things, these tropes that happen within the black community that say status and say success. And, I grew up with aunts that, my uncle was the head of fiscal affairs and treasury at Hampton University. She would never go to the bus station with her curlers in her hair. And Oprah understood that. I understood that. But there was a reason for Lee asking for it. And Lee, as a director, usually does things like this, shock value. You think of Precious and some of the characters, Mariah Carey and Precious, who played a social worker. There were some raw things that were displayed in her character that, helped tell her story. But we felt that this wasn't telling Earl Gaines' story properly. And so I called Lee and I expressed that. And he said, okay, no curlers. Then I called Oprah back. No, I texted Oprah, and she called me back. And she said, how did you do that? And I said, actually, not saying no, just saying, here's my opinion. Here's my take on it. And here's why I think she would have her hair done.
Well, he obviously trusts your taste, and that's why he hired you. Yeah. So he needs to listen to you. I love that, and I love that scene too, and I really love hearing that story. So I'd like to talk about your work with Ryan Coogler now, the incredible Ryan Coogler, and Marvel's Black Panther, which opened February of 2018. And of course, based on Marvel's comic about T'Challa, the king and protector of the fictional nation of Wakanda, which is rich in a metal called vibranium. The film earned over $1 billion at the box office. Incredible. So before we talk about Black Panther, I would love to learn more about a concept called Afrofuturism and how it pertains to your work on these projects.
Yeah, Afrofuture, like we always feel like our future is in a mix of culture and forward thinking and technology. When you think back, to Earth, Wind, and Fire, and they were in those, sci-fi. When you think of Bootsy and Parliament Funkadelic, you can't help but think Afrofuture, and it always seems so out of bounds, out of space, out of world. But my take on Afrofuture is when I see Ava DuVernay standing on the set of Selma, who was a publicist who envisioned herself as a director, and she's directing Selma, like she's envisioning her own Afrofuture. When I feel like Spike writes a script like Do the Right Thing and wants representation not only for who we really are in front of the camera, but also wanting to see more people of color behind the camera. He's envisioning an Afrofuture. And so it's more than just fusing technology with culture, which is what we did with Black Panther. It's also envisioning a world without colonization, with the freedom to be who we truly are, without hindrance of society, racism, colonization, all of those things. So that's what Afrofuture means to me.
And I have to assume this was the most effects-heavy film you had ever worked on. And in some ways, it makes your job easier. You can tile groups and thousands of characters without having to dress them. But I do want
still have to dress them.
Yeah, you still have to dress them. But how did the rise of technology and special effects impact your work? But also, how did it, I guess, keep the work grounded? Because I think we all watch some of these films, and not Black Panther, where you think, God, this just looks like a video game. But I think what was so special about Black Panther and the sequel is that it still felt handmade to me. So tell me how you balance those.
When I walked into Marvel for the first time, I sat in front of Ryan Coogler, who said to me, I studied the films of Spike Lee at USC, and I really loved your work in Malcolm X. And that was the same thing that Steven Spielberg had said to me. And I felt immediately that I could offer this young man something that he was looking for, and that was realism and building a world, because we had to build Malcolm X's life. And then I knew that this was not about creating a comic book film, something that felt very unattainable or unrelatable. This was actually building Wakanda, a world that I actually knew, that I actually experienced as a child, as we studied Kwanzaa at Christmas time, as we experienced Africa Day at church, where the whole choir dressed in geles and Ankara fabrics, that Afrofuture actually is living in us, and that we just needed to bring it out in the superhero model. So it was really gathering things and dressing people in ways in which I think was not being seen on screen, that honored tribes, but also honored like innovation and fashion forward ways of showing fashion that also had an African pride laced into it. So that's how we also had a Wakandan Bible that Hannah and Ryan put together. So you knew all about Wakanda and their ways. They had a university section like NYU. They had a medical section. There was all of these different areas of Wakanda. And so knowing that it was a fully sussed out world in place, it doesn't exist, right? Okay.
It's probably a good reminder to tell people that it doesn't. Yeah.
It wasn't easy, but there was ways in which you could kind of compartmentalize the different areas of Wakanda, and they all had names. So they did the groundwork, and we used about 12 tribes. There's thousands of tribes throughout the continent. We just used 12 that we were inspired by. So we had the Jabari, who they were inspired by the Dogon. We had all of the difference. We had the merchant tribe that was inspired by North Africa and Mali. We had color codes that we used for the river tribe, which was inspired by the Surma and the Suri people by the river, where the children put the flowers in their hair and they take the ash and they decorate their faces. So we were inspired to create these worlds based on tribal tradition and expand them into this mythical place, this Wakandan place that also had this vibranium. So when we put together the border tribe, and Ryan had gone to Africa because he felt like he could not write or direct a film about Africa if he hadn't gone there ever, and he hadn't. So they let him spend time, and he went to South Africa to stay with the Basotho people, and they had these beautiful blankets that he fell in love with, and asked me to import them and put vibranium on one side and make them like shields for the border tribe. Vibranium doesn't exist too, right? Okay. So we put vibranium on one side of the blankets, and we turned them into shields for the border tribe. So there was this idea that happened, and it evolved, and it expanded as we created things. And, you know, we had all of the layers. We had T'Challa, you know, entering into the royal palace wearing kente. And if you know, kente is a cloth that's worn for special occasions. So we put him in kente, a robe that was trimmed in kente for those scenes. We were really showing how the Black Panther like lived around the world of Wakanda. And one of the most interesting things for me was to think about how he would be in this black catsuit, you know, in a world that was fully dressed. Like, how do we connect this Black Panther suit to Africa? And we created the Okavango triangle, which is like the sacred geometry of Africa. It represents the family. You see it in a lot of the artistry. And so we put this triangle pattern all over the suit. And the suit is actually designed by Marvel. Ryan Meiterding at Marvel was the initiator of the design. But the surface texture needed to connect, and so we created the surface Okavango triangle, as well as this veining line that traveled around the suit that had all of this Wakandan language, and it had all of these sayings that honored the king and honored the Black Panther, but it was written in Wakandan fonts that was also created by Hannah Beekler production design. So there was an immersion of artists and intention to the whole world of Wakanda and the Black Panther.
And it's no surprise that you won an Oscar for your work on this film and became the first Black woman to win in this category. And your friend Spike also won that night, his first Oscar for writing Black Klansman, 30 years after his first nomination for Do the Right Thing. Yes. How did it feel to see each other excel in such a meaningful way at the same time on the same night? I remember he was just whooping and hollering from the audience. It was such a special thing to see.
It was a special night. I always thought that I would win the Oscar one day. And I always thought that one day I would win that Oscar for a Spike Lee joint. You know, I was at the pyramids looking at Denzel riding a camel on a Spike Lee joint. That just doesn't happen in Hollywood. And I always felt that that big day I would share it with Spike. And yet I was winning for Black Panther, Ryan Coogler's film, who was actually like a protege. And Spike was 4 rows down as I stood on stage, and I had a written script. And it just overwhelmed me. And I said, you know, thank you, Spike, for my start. I hope this makes you proud. Because he is the reason why I was standing there. And he is the reason why I had the opportunity to converse and to collaborate and to share with Ryan Coogler, who said in my interview, I loved your work in Malcolm X. So I felt so connected that day. Ryan, you know, to my right, Spike right in front of me, and it just felt like a full circle moment. I felt really whole at that moment.
Incredible. And in August of 2020, we lost Chadwick Boseman. I remember exactly where I was. It was during COVID. It was stunning, stunning, terrible news. And he famously had kept his illness private, as he should have. And I'd love for you to share something about Chadwick that you want us to remember and know about him, because I had never had the honor of meeting him, but I have a sense that he was an extremely special person.
He was an auteur. You would see him standing to the side, and you might be kind of shy about walking over to him. But when you did and you said hello, he might say hello back to you in like a South African accent because he's thinking about how he's going to speak as T'Challa. And you playfully could speak back to him in your version of a South African accent. And he would keep it going. And he was playful in that way. And when I first got the news that I was going to be the costume designer for Black Panther, it was 5 a.m. I was in the parking lot of the film I was doing with him. He was playing Thurgood Marshall, and it was our first day of filming. And I thought to myself, I can't walk into his trailer the first day of filming and say, hey, we haven't even started this film, but I'm on your next film. So I decided to keep it quiet, not say anything about it. I wanted him to like me. I wanted him to like his costume for Thurgood. So we went through this whole movie, and maybe a week before the movie was done, I said, hey, Chad, I'm the costume designer for Black Panther. And he said, yeah, I know. And I thought, wow, he was able to keep that quiet along with me. Like as many times as we convened and we collaborated on, is this the right tie or the wrong tie? And all those times we were together on Thurgood, he never said anything. He waited for me. And I just loved that. We walked into doing the Black Panther already with kind of a great relationship and a kinship that I felt was ours. And I think it really did help when he first put on the first Black Panther suit was seen in Captain America: Civil War. That's where it was introduced. And it was put in at the last minute, so it was done quickly. There were things that needed to be done over, and one of them was, as Chad said, as he put the suit on in my office, one way to get him in your office was that he couldn't breathe out of his nose with the helmet, and that he couldn't lift his arm really in the suit. So we created a suit that had special gussets. We had a girl who cut for the ballet, the Boston Ballet, come in, and she made us a suit with special gussets for him to do martial arts. We also made a trap door on the helmet so that when he was really being active and he needed to breathe, we took the trap door off the nose and mouth area, and in post they put it back on so he could, do his work and actually get some air. So there was a great relationship with him. So it was very devastating, that once we started putting Wakanda Forever together, that he had perished.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sure it remains probably very difficult. And so speaking of Wakanda Forever, you won your second Oscar for your work on that film. And in rewatching your Oscar speech, I was reminded that your mother had passed away recently before that night at the age of 101. Yeah. And I wanted to know how she felt about being able to see you do such incredible work. Obviously, she's proud of you. That goes without saying. But what did she tell you about what you had made with your life?
My mother was proud of me for being who I wanted to be. She wasn't sure exactly in the beginning what a costume designer was. I remember her coming to backstage where I was working after college. I was working on a play, and I had to collect the clothes and do the laundry. And my mother said, "You mean to me you've gone to school for 4 years, you got a bachelor's degree in theater arts, and you come out and you're doing laundry?" So I had to sort of groom my mom to understand what the costume designer was, and that she was an artist, and she began to understand it, as I worked for Spike Lee and I started to, be a fully fledged professional, and I paid off her house and I bought her a new car, and she was like, "Yeah, I like this costume design thing. I'm getting it." But she was really proud of me.
I'm sorry for your loss. She was obviously an amazing person.
Yeah, 101 is pretty awesome.
It really doesn't get much better than that. Truly extraordinary. So we come to Sinners. Another huge congratulations to you and Ryan Coogler, the top grossing original horror film of all time. Wow. 367 million worldwide so far, and I'm sure that number is still changing, on a budget of 90 million. So that's a great return. Warner Brothers is very happy about this. And for those who haven't seen it, it centers on two twin brothers, Smoke and Stack, played by Michael B. Jordan, who return to their hometown to start again, only to discover that a greater evil is waiting to welcome them back. So if I'm not mistaken, this was your first horror film certainly within this genre. I have to ask about managing blood. What is this process like? What is this blood made of? Are you having multiple copies of every single outfit? Describe the scope of this challenge.
Yeah. At first, I must say that I was so interested in the Mississippi Delta, the emergence of the blues, the Great Migration, what sharecroppers went through, what they looked like, workwear, denim, wool, what a person who migrated out of the South to Chicago and then reverse migrated back to the Mississippi. What does that look like? That's the first layer. And once I got that layer where I was happy, we had to make multiples because of the blood. And every time Ryan said more blood, my blood pressure went up. Because I connect to the clothes. I connect to the story of the clothes. When you're a sharecropper and you're wearing overalls, I mean, the blues players would sing about their experiences and talk about their experiences as children and wearing overalls and what the South meant, with neighboring plantations where blues players went from plantation to plantation playing the blues, how culturally it became creating something out of nothing. And so adding a layer of blood was devastating to me.
Is it hard to see your work become so dirty?
I love the dirty work. I love my work looking sweaty and aged, and that was a big part of how we created the world. But the bloody part, our wardrobe truck looked like a lab because we had to have large plastic sheeting dividing things that had one layer of blood and then a second layer of blood, and then, Sammy gets dunked in the water and the blood washes off. And now what does that look like after he's been in a battle with Remick? So there, each costume, there were, 20 of multiples of any one item, just so we could track the story that was shot out of order. When you see Sinners and it opens and Sammy is driving to the church, we shot that before the battle. So we had to discuss and converse on set, if we needed to add a little more dried blood to the costume, what color that was, how aged his costume was after that. We had to imagine everything and set it into play. So there were a lot of discussions about blood, blood.
I would imagine, having seen the film.
Yes.
Well, congratulations again on Sinners. And
Thank
before
you.
we wrap, I do want to ask, is there any inkling of news on Black Panther 3? Because Ryan did hint at that recently. So I want to know what you have heard.
Marvel's like the CIA. They're on a need-to-know basis. And right now, I don't need to know. No. There's no rumblings. I'm coming off of Thomas Crown Affair, directed by Michael B. Jordan, starring Michael B. Jordan, and we shot that in London and Italy, and I'm only 2 weeks from that wrapping, and it's nice to be home for the holidays.
I love that. I hope you can rest a little bit. So in closing, Ruth, I have a couple questions I like to ask my guests. The first one is, what do you hope people take away from hearing your Hollywood story?
I hope people are inspired to be storytellers. I feel that My Hollywood Story is about a girl who pulled herself up from her bootstraps, who had a dream to be a costume designer and a storyteller who really believed in her dream and pursued it. And so I just hope that, I inspire the next generation and there'll be a costume designer. There are costume designers. When I see costume designers that look like me, in studio services, pulling clothes for whatever it is, a TV show or whatever it is, I feel like I had a little something to do with that.
Absolutely. And the last question, what have you learned about yourself in sharing your story with us today?
I appreciate the opportunity to tell my story, and I appreciate your eyes and ears on me as I speak about the good and the bad of becoming a Hollywood costume designer, and being here today is really special, and I'm appreciative, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you. My Hollywood Story is a production of Hippolyta Films and Entertainment. The series is written, produced, and hosted by me, Stacey Wilson Hunt. Executive producers for Hippolyta are Sonia Slutsky and Wendy Green. Series producers also include Daryl Young and Janet Grayson. Our camera operator, sound mixer, and editor is Ramiro Cantu. Original music for My Hollywood Story is by Madi Gavriel and Jenny Carr of Moon and Star. Our logo design was created by Brad Mitchell. And I would like to give a very special thanks to Soho House West Hollywood for being the official new home of our show. We couldn't do it without you.